It was another typical Saturday afternoon in London, and Tommy was already 3 pints deep at his favorite pub near Westminster. The 28-year-old construction worker had the kind of personality that filled up any room he walked into. Loud, confident, and always looking for the next bit of excitement. His mates called him a legend, though the people who actually had to deal with his antics might have used different words. Tommy had grown up on the rougher side of East London, where showing weakness meant getting picked on, so he learned early to be the one doing the picking. School bullies, work supervisors, random strangers on the street. Tommy had a gift for finding people's buttons and pushing them hard. It wasn't that he was evil or anything. He just never learned when to stop. His friends thought it was hilarious, and Tommy lived for their cheers and laughter. Today was supposed to be just another lad's day out. Tommy and his 3 best friends had started drinking around noon, hopping from pub to pub without any real plan. They were the kind of group that other customers quietly moved away from, not because they were dangerous exactly, but because they were loud, unpredictable, and had zero respect for personal space. By the time they stumbled out of their 4th pub, the afternoon sun was getting lower and Tommy was feeling invincible. That's when Danny, his oldest mate, pointed toward the famous red uniforms in the distance. "Oi, Tommy, you see those guards over there?" Danny said with a mischievous grin. "Bet you wouldn't dare mess with one of them fancy soldiers." Tommy's eyes lit up like a kid who just found a new toy. The Royal Guards at Buckingham Palace were famous worldwide. Those serious-looking men in their bright red coats and massive black hats, standing perfectly still like living statues. Tourists came from all over the world just to take pictures with them and try to make them laugh or move. "Are you having a laugh?" Tommy replied, puffing out his chest. "Those toy soldiers? They're just for show, mate. Probably couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag." His friends started egging him on, the way they always did when Tommy was about to do something stupid. It was like a game to them. See how far they could push their mate before he actually went through with whatever crazy idea popped into his head. "Come on then, big man," said Pete, another one of his drinking buddies. "If they're so harmless, go prove it. Make one of them break character." Tommy had never been one to back down from a dare. In his mind, backing down meant looking weak, and looking weak was the worst thing that could happen to a guy like him. He'd built his whole reputation on being the one who would do what others wouldn't dare. The group started walking toward the palace, with Tommy leading the way like some kind of general marching into battle. Other tourists were taking photos and admiring the famous guards, but Tommy saw something completely different. To him, these weren't highly trained soldiers. They were just fancy dress-up dolls waiting for someone to knock them down a peg. What Tommy didn't know, and wouldn't have cared about even if someone had told him, was that these guards weren't just for decoration. Every single one of them was a real soldier who had earned their position through years of intense training. They'd been chosen not just for their ability to stand still and look impressive, but for their combat skills, discipline, and mental toughness. But Tommy wasn't thinking about any of that as he swaggered toward his target. In his alcohol-clouded mind, he was about to pull off the prank of the century. His mates would be talking about this for years. He'd probably end up famous on social media. Maybe he'd even get on the news. The guard he'd chosen was standing at his post like a statue, eyes fixed straight ahead, rifle held perfectly in position. To the casual observer, he looked like he might as well have been made of wax. But Tommy was about to learn that still waters run very, very deep. As they got closer, Tommy's friends started getting their phones out. This was definitely going to be worth recording. They positioned themselves to get the best angle while Tommy started psyching himself up for whatever he was planning to do. The afternoon air was filled with the sounds of London traffic and tourist chatter, but Tommy only heard the blood pumping in his ears and his friends' encouraging shouts. He was in his element now, the center of attention, about to do something that would make him the star of the group once again. Little did he know that in about 10 minutes, he'd be the star of something very different indeed. While Tommy was getting ready to cause trouble, the man in the red uniform was doing exactly what he'd been trained to do for the past 8 years of his military career. Staff Sergeant David Collins had seen it all during his time in the Army, from dangerous missions overseas to dealing with difficult situations right here at home. Standing perfectly still might look easy to someone watching, but it actually takes incredible mental and physical discipline. David had learned this skill through months of grueling training, where instructors would test guards in every way possible. They'd shout in their faces, try to distract them, and push them to their absolute limits. The idea was simple. If you could handle anything the training threw at you, you could handle anything the real world might bring. David wasn't just any soldier either. Before getting this prestigious posting at Buckingham Palace, he'd served 2 tours of duty in some of the world's most dangerous places. He'd been in situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. He'd learned to read people's intentions from tiny details in their body language and voice. So when he noticed the group of loud men approaching his position, David's training immediately kicked in. Without moving his eyes or changing his expression in any way, he began assessing the situation. 4 men, clearly drinking, getting louder as they got closer. The one in front, medium build, aggressive posture, hands moving around a lot when he talked, was obviously the leader of the group. David had dealt with hundreds of people like this during his time on guard duty. Most of them just wanted to take a photo or try to get a reaction. They'd make silly faces, tell jokes or ask questions, then give up and move on when they realized the guards weren't going to respond. It was all part of the job, and David had learned to tune most of it out. But there was something different about this group. The way they were positioning themselves, getting their phones ready, and the increasingly aggressive tone of their voices told David that this might not be just another harmless tourist interaction. Through his peripheral vision, he could see other visitors starting to notice the commotion. A family with young children moved further away. An elderly couple stopped taking photos and began walking toward the palace gates. Even other tourists could sense that something was building up. David's military training had taught him that the best way to handle most situations was through what they called professional presence. By maintaining perfect discipline and composure, he could usually outlast any troublemaker's attention span. Most people got bored pretty quickly when they realized they weren't going to get the reaction they wanted. But David was also trained for situations where professional presence wasn't enough. Every guard at the palace had extensive combat training and was authorized to defend themselves, the royal family, and the general public if necessary. They weren't just ceremonial figures. They were working soldiers with real responsibilities and real authority. The irony was that Tommy had actually picked one of the most experienced guards on duty that day. David had been selected for this position partly because of his ability to stay calm under pressure, but also because his superiors knew he could handle himself if things went badly. As Tommy got closer and started his usual routine of insults and aggressive gestures, David remained perfectly still. His breathing stayed controlled, his expression unchanged, his rifle held in exactly the same position. To anyone watching, it looked like he might as well have been deaf and blind. But inside his head, David was running through different scenarios. He was noting Tommy's movements, calculating distances, and preparing for various possible outcomes. Years of training had made this process automatic, like a computer program running in the background of his mind. The other guards on duty had also noticed what was happening. Though they continued to maintain their positions, there were security cameras recording everything, and plainclothes police officers nearby who could respond if needed. But David knew that if something happened quickly, he might need to handle it himself before help could arrive. What made David different from Tommy wasn't just his training, it was his mindset. While Tommy saw this as a game, a chance to show off for his friends, David understood that his job was serious business. He was responsible for protecting one of the most important buildings in the country, and he took that responsibility very personally. As Tommy's behavior escalated, David could feel the familiar calm focus that came over him in tense situations. It was the same feeling he'd had during his military service, a combination of complete alertness and perfect control. His body was ready to respond instantly if needed, but his mind remained crystal clear and rational. The crowd of tourists was getting larger now, with people starting to point and whisper. Some were getting their cameras out, sensing that they might be about to witness something worth recording. But none of them realized just how quickly things were about to change. David had given Tommy every chance to lose interest and move on. He'd maintained perfect professionalism even as the insults got louder and more personal. But he could read the signs in Tommy's body language, the clenched fists, the invasion of personal space, the way his friends were encouraging him to go further. In his mind, David was already 3 steps ahead, ready for whatever came next. Tommy was getting frustrated, and that was never a good thing. For the past 5 minutes, he'd been putting on his best show, shouting jokes, making faces, waving his hands right in front of the guard's face, and even doing a silly dance. His mates were recording it all and laughing, but the reaction Tommy really wanted just wasn't happening. The guard hadn't moved so much as an eyelash, not even a tiny smile or a blink that might suggest Tommy was getting to him. It was like trying to get a reaction from a brick wall, and Tommy's ego couldn't handle it. "Come on then, mate," Tommy shouted, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. "I know you can hear me. What's the matter? Too good to talk to regular people?" A small crowd had gathered to watch the show. Most of them looked uncomfortable, but a few were clearly enjoying the entertainment. Tommy loved having an audience. It always made him push things further than he normally would. "Look at this guy," Tommy announced to the crowd, gesturing dramatically at the motionless guard. "Thinks he's some kind of hero in that fancy costume. Bet he's never seen a real fight in his life." His friend Danny was recording everything on his phone, already imagining how many views this would get on social media. "Keep going, Tommy," he called out. "You're brilliant." But Tommy was running out of ideas. He'd tried everything in his usual playbook. Insults, jokes, weird faces, even pretending to trip and fall right in front of the guard. Nothing worked. The man in the red uniform just stood there like he was made of stone. That's when Tommy made his biggest mistake. Instead of giving up and walking away like a smart person would have done, he decided to take things to the next level. "Right, if you won't talk to me," Tommy said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Maybe I need to get your attention a different way." He started getting closer, invading the guard's personal space in a way that made several tourists step back nervously. Tommy was now close enough to smell the polish on the guard's boots and see his own reflection in the brass buttons of the uniform. "Still nothing?" Tommy taunted. "What kind of soldier are you? In my day, men knew how to stand up for themselves." The guard's silence was starting to feel personal to Tommy. In his twisted logic, this wasn't just about showing off anymore. This was about respect. How dare this guy ignore him? How dare he act like Tommy wasn't even worth acknowledging? What Tommy didn't understand was that his behavior was being carefully monitored and recorded by multiple security systems. Plainclothes police officers had been alerted and were making their way through the crowd. The other guards on duty were aware of the situation and ready to respond if needed. But most importantly, David the guard was not ignoring Tommy at all. Every insult, every aggressive gesture, every step closer was being noted and evaluated. David's training had taught him to gather information while appearing completely passive, and right now he was learning everything he needed to know about the man in front of him. Tommy's movements were getting more erratic. His balance was off from the alcohol. His friends were still encouraging him, but their voices had a nervous edge now. Even they were starting to realize that this might be going too far. "Tommy, mate, maybe we should head to the next pub," suggested Pete, though he kept his camera rolling. "No way," Tommy snapped back. "I'm not leaving until Captain Silent here shows me some respect." That's when Tommy crossed the line that would change everything. Instead of continuing with words, he decided to make it physical. Later, when he was sitting in a police cell with a splitting headache, Tommy would realize that this was the exact moment when his fun day out turned into his worst nightmare. The crowd sensed the shift in energy before Tommy even made his move. Conversations stopped. People started backing away. A mother grabbed her young son's hand and pulled him behind her. Everyone could feel that something bad was about to happen. Tommy pulled his right arm back, his hand curled into a fist. His face was red with anger and alcohol, his eyes focused on the guard's jaw. In his mind, he was about to land the punch that would finally get a reaction. He imagined the guard stumbling backward, maybe even falling down, while the crowd gasped, in shock. "Let's see how tough you are now," Tommy shouted, and threw the hardest punch he could manage. For just a split second, Time seemed to slow down. Tommy's fist moved through the air toward its target. The crowd held its breath. Camera. Phones recorded every frame, and David the guard, who had been waiting and preparing for exactly this moment, finally had legal justification to do what his training had prepared him for. The punch that Tommy thought would be his moment of glory was actually about to become the biggest mistake of his life. Because what happened next would be talked about, shared and remembered long after Tommy wished everyone would just forget about it. What happened next took exactly 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds would be replayed millions of times across the internet and become the most expensive 3 seconds of Tommy's entire life. The moment Tommy's fist started moving toward his face, David's training kicked in automatically. 8 years of military discipline, countless hours of combat practice, and months of specialized guard training all came together in one perfectly executed defensive sequence. First, David smoothly shifted his weight and moved his head just enough to let Tommy's punch glance off his jaw instead of landing square. Tommy had put all his strength behind that punch, expecting to connect with something solid, so when it met only air and the side of David's face, Tommy's own momentum carried him forward off balance. Before Tommy even realized his punch had mostly missed, David was already moving. In one fluid motion, he secured his rifle with his left hand while his right hand came up to grab Tommy's extended arm. Using Tommy's own forward momentum against him, David stepped to the side and executed what the Army called a controlled takedown. It wasn't a brutal attack or an angry retaliation. It was a textbook defensive move designed to neutralize a threat quickly and safely. David used just enough force to put Tommy on the ground without causing serious injury. Exactly what his training had taught him to do. Tommy found himself spinning through the air, his feet leaving the ground completely. 1 second, he was throwing what he thought was the punch of his life. And the next second, he was looking up at the London sky, his back flat against the cold pavement. The sound Tommy made when he hit the ground, a surprised oof, mixed with the thud of his body against concrete, echoed across the suddenly silent courtyard. For a moment, the only sounds were London traffic in the distance and the click of dozens of camera phones capturing the moment. Tommy lay there blinking in confusion, trying to figure out what had just happened. His head was spinning, partly from the alcohol and partly from the shock of finding himself horizontal when he'd expected to be standing victorious. There was a dull pain in his back where he'd hit the pavement, and his right arm felt like it had been twisted in directions it wasn't meant to go. David was already back in his original position, rifle held properly, eyes forward, as if nothing had happened at all. The only sign that anything had occurred was Tommy sprawled on the ground a few feet away, still trying to process what had gone wrong with his brilliant plan. The crowd erupted. Some people started clapping and cheering, clearly enjoying the fact that the troublemaker had gotten what was coming to him. Others gasped in shock at how quickly and efficiently the guard had handled the situation. A few people were already uploading videos to social media with captions like, "Bully gets instant karma and don't mess with the Queen's Guard." Tommy's friends rushed over to help him up, but they were laughing even as they tried to look concerned. Danny was still filming, already imagining how many likes this video was going to get. Pete was shaking his head in amazement at what he'd just witnessed. "Bloody hell, Tommy," Danny said, trying not to laugh. "Did you see how fast that happened? 1 second you were throwing a punch, next second you were eating pavement." Tommy struggled to his feet with his friend's help, his face now red with embarrassment instead of anger. His tough guy image had just been destroyed in front of dozens of strangers, and he knew the whole thing was being recorded from multiple angles. But the humiliation was just getting started. Within seconds of Tommy getting back on his feet, he heard the distinctive sound of police radios crackling nearby. 2 uniformed Metropolitan Police officers were pushing through the crowd, their expressions serious and professional. The palace security system had caught everything on camera, from Tommy's initial harassment to his assault on the guard, to David's perfectly justified response. There was no question about what had happened or who was at fault. "Right then," said the first police officer, a stern-looking woman with sergeant stripes on her uniform. "I think we need to have a little chat with you, sir." Tommy's friends suddenly found other places to look. The crowd that had been so entertained by his antics started to disperse, not wanting to get involved in whatever was coming next. Even Danny stopped filming and quietly slipped his phone into his pocket. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in for Tommy. This wasn't just a bit of fun that had gone wrong, this was serious trouble. He'd just assaulted a member of the military in front of dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras. His day of showing off was about to become a very different kind of memorable experience. As the police officers approached him, Tommy looked back at the guard one last time. David was still standing in perfect position, completely focused on his duty, as if Tommy had never existed at all. It was probably the most professional thing Tommy had ever seen, and it made him realize just how badly he'd misjudged the situation. The 3 seconds that had seemed so important to Tommy had been just another day at work for David. But for Tommy, those 3 seconds were about to change everything. The police interview room was nothing like the pubs Tommy had been enjoying just a few hours earlier. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the plastic chair was uncomfortable, and the strong smell of disinfectant reminded him exactly how much trouble he was in. Detective Inspector Wilson sat across from Tommy with a thick folder of evidence, security footage from multiple angles, witness statements from tourists, and photos of the incident were all stacked neatly on the table between them. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," the detective said in a calm, professional voice. "You approached a member of Her Majesty's Guard, spent several minutes harassing him, then punched him in the face. Is that about right?" Tommy's head was pounding, and not just from the hangover that was starting to kick in. The reality of his situation was becoming clearer with every passing minute. This wasn't going to be a slap on the wrist and a night in the cells. This was serious criminal charges that could affect the rest of his life. "Look, it was just a bit of fun," Tommy tried to explain. "I didn't mean any real harm. It was just, lads being lads." Detective Wilson looked at him with the expression of someone who'd heard that excuse about 1,000 times before. "Mr. Tommy, you assaulted a serving member of the military while they were on official duty. In legal terms, that's not lads being lads. That's a serious criminal offense." The charges were read out like items on a shopping list that Tommy definitely couldn't afford. Assault on a military officer, drunk and disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, public intoxication. Each charge came with potential fines, possible jail time, and a permanent criminal record that would show up on background checks for jobs, housing applications, and travel documents. Meanwhile, news of the incident was spreading faster than Tommy could have ever imagined. Someone had uploaded the video to social media within minutes of it happening, and it was already being shared, thousands of times. The clear footage showed everything: Tommy's aggressive behavior, his failed punch, and his spectacular takedown by the guard. By the time Tommy was released on bail the next morning, he was internet famous for all the wrong reasons. The video had been picked up by news websites, shared in military forums, and turned into countless memes. People were calling him everything from Pavement Pete to the Royal Fail, to names that were much less polite. His construction job was the first casualty of his newfound fame. Tommy's boss called him into the office on Monday morning with a printed copy of the viral video and a termination letter. "I can't have someone with your judgment representing this company," his boss explained. "What if you do something stupid on a job site? We'd be liable for everything." The legal consequences kept piling up. Tommy's lawyer, a tired-looking man who clearly dealt with cases like this regularly, explained that the evidence against him was overwhelming. "The best we can hope for is a plea bargain," he said. "But even then, you're looking at a significant fine, community service, and a criminal record." The fine alone was enough to wipe out Tommy's savings and put him into debt. Nearly £3,000 for what he'd thought was just a bit of harmless fun. The community service meant spending his weekends doing unpaid work instead of enjoying himself with his mates. And the criminal record would make finding another decent job much harder. But perhaps the worst part was how his friends reacted. Danny, Pete, and the others had thought it was hilarious when Tommy was getting taken down, but they weren't laughing anymore when they realized the serious consequences. They started avoiding him, not wanting to be associated with someone who'd become a laughingstock online. The video continued to haunt Tommy everywhere he went. Potential employers would Google his name and find the footage. People in pubs would recognize him and ask if he was that guy from the guard video. Even strangers on the street would sometimes point and whisper when they saw him. David the guard, meanwhile, had received official recognition for his professionalism and restraint during the incident. His commanding officers praised him for using exactly the right amount of force to neutralize the threat without causing serious injury. He'd handled a difficult situation perfectly, and his military record now included a commendation for exemplary service. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. David had done his job exactly as trained and been recognized for it. Tommy had acted like a fool and was paying the price for it every single day. 6 months later, Tommy was working a minimum wage job at a warehouse, still paying off his legal fees and trying to rebuild his reputation. The viral video had over 2 million views and showed no signs of being forgotten anytime soon. Every time he thought people might have moved on to the next internet sensation, someone would share it again or use it in a new meme. The lesson Tommy learned, though it took him far too long to understand it, was that actions have consequences. The Royal Guards weren't just decorative soldiers in fancy uniforms. They were highly trained military personnel doing an important job. Treating them with disrespect wasn't just rude, it was dangerous and illegal. If Tommy could go back to that Saturday afternoon and make different choices, he would have walked past the guards without a second thought. He would have enjoyed his drinks with his friends, gone home safely, and woken up the next morning without a criminal record and a viral video following him around forever. But life doesn't offer do-overs, and Tommy's 3 seconds of poor judgment became a permanent reminder that sometimes the toughest lesson is learning when not to fight at all.